She was just 8 years old, a red balloon tied to her wrist, a summer dress with daisies sewn by her mother. One second she was laughing in the grass during a family picnic in Eugene, Oregon. The next, she was gone. No screams, no footprints anyone could follow, just silence, and a balloon tangled in the trees. 15 years later, a drone camera scans the vast Oregon forest, and in a single frame, a pale face framed by tangled hair stares up at the lens, eyes wide, hollow, familiar. This is the story of a sister who refused to stop searching, of a girl who learned to survive in silence, and of a truth that would finally shatter a family's darkest secret. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every comment, and I truly love the interaction with all of you. The sun had barely risen above the rolling hills of Eugene, Oregon, when the Mitchell family spread out a checkered blanket in the grass. It was June 2010, a warm Saturday morning, and the air smelled faintly of pine needles and damp soil from the forest that bordered Alton Baker Park. Birds chirped from the tall evergreens, and the steady murmur of the Willamette River carried in the background, a natural soundtrack to what was supposed to be an ordinary family picnic. Children laughed as they chased one another near the edge of the clearing. A red balloon drifted lazily against the sky, its string tied around the small wrist of 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell. She wore a simple white summer dress, her shoes already stained green from the grass, and she ran back and forth with the carefree rhythm of a child who believed the world was nothing but safe. Nearby, her older sister Jessica, 12 at the time, sat cross-legged on the blanket, distracted by a paperback book. She occasionally lifted her eyes to watch Sarah, half smiling, half annoyed at the constant squeals of excitement. Their mother, Linda, unpacked sandwiches from a wicker basket, while their father, Robert, adjusted a small radio that played faint country music, slightly distorted with static. It was a picture of peace, almost cinematic, yet beneath the surface, silence lingered like a shadow waiting to fall. The forest line stood like a wall beyond the open grass. Towering trees, thick underbrush, and narrow trails that seemed to lead nowhere. Parents warned their children not to wander too far inside, but kids were kids, and Sarah had always been curious. The sound of rustling leaves or a snapping twig often caught her attention more than her mother's voice did. At one point, a breeze carried the smell of smoke, distant, faint, maybe from a campfire deeper in the woods. Sarah turned her head toward it, tugging on her balloon string as if it were guiding her. For a few seconds her eyes locked on the darkness between the trees, and then she took a step closer. Jessica lifted her head from the book just in time to see her sister drifting away from the picnic blanket. "Sarah, don't go too far," she called, her voice casual, almost lazy, as though she had said it 100 times before. Sarah glanced back with a mischievous grin, then pointed toward the balloon, tugging at it, as if to say, "I'm just following where it goes." The red balloon bobbed against the backdrop of green, a single bright dot, swallowed by the vastness of the forest. The family chatter carried on, Linda humming while arranging food, Robert muttering at the static-filled radio. No one noticed that Sarah's small figure was already half hidden by the trees. The air shifted once she crossed the threshold into the woods. The warmth of the sun gave way to the cool dampness beneath the canopy. The sound of birds seemed muted, replaced by the distant rush of wind threading through branches. She let the balloon slip from her hand for a moment, watching it float upward before it snagged on a tree limb high above. Her laughter echoed faintly, swallowed by the shadows. Minutes passed. Jessica looked up again and frowned. The meadow felt suddenly too quiet. The spot where Sarah had been standing was empty. She pushed the book aside, scanning the tree line, her stomach twisting with unease. "Mom?" Jessica's voice cracked slightly. Linda turned, smiling absently, but the smile faded when she saw her daughter's expression. Together, they both stared into the thick brush. "Sarah!" Linda's voice rang out across the park, sharp and commanding. Silence answered. Robert stood quickly, his face paling, the radio forgotten in the grass. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, louder this time, "Sarah!" No reply, no rustle of branches, no small footsteps running back, only the balloon string dangling from the tree, swaying in the breeze like a taunt. In that moment, an ordinary picnic unraveled into chaos. Plates toppled, food scattered, voices rose in panic. Jessica's heart pounded as she ran toward the trees, her sandals slipping on the uneven ground. The shadows between the trunks stretched longer, darker, as though hiding something they weren't ready to give back. And just like that, the Mitchell family's world shattered. 15 years later, Jessica Mitchell sat in the quiet corner of a coffee shop in downtown Eugene, Oregon, staring at the rim of her untouched mug. At 27, she carried herself with the weight of someone older. Her hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, revealed eyes that had seen too much, even though they had never stopped searching for the one thing she had lost. On the table lay a notebook worn thin from years of use. Its pages were filled with timelines, hand-drawn maps, copied articles from local newspapers, and scribbled names of people who had once claimed to see something that day. Jessica had turned her grief into an obsession, and her obsession into purpose. She was no longer just Sarah's sister. She had become the unofficial keeper of her memory. She studied journalism in college, not to chase fame or write for glossy magazines, but because she believed the truth had to be hunted, recorded, exposed. Her professors admired her determination, but they whispered about her distance, how she rarely laughed, how her essays bled with personal undertones. She wasn't writing to earn grades. She was writing to keep her sister alive. At night, she replayed the sounds of that picnic in her mind, the faint radio static, her mother's humming, her father's muffled curse at the stubborn antenna. Then the silence. Always the silence. It came to her in dreams, leaving her waking up in sweat, her chest tight as if she were 12 again, powerless and small. Jessica's apartment mirrored her mind, orderly, but filled with relics of a past she could not let go. On the desk rested a framed photo of Sarah, missing teeth showing through a wide grin, a balloon string wrapped around her wrist. And next to it, inside a small velvet box, the silver star necklace Jessica had received for her 12th birthday, the very same she had clutched when she realized her sister was gone. That necklace had become her talisman, the anchor she held to every time hope felt like it was slipping away. Despite the years, Jessica never truly moved forward. Friends had come and gone, relationships failed under the strain of her relentless focus. Even family dinners were hollow, the air all was thick with unspoken questions. The Mitchells were a family of shadows now, orbiting around the space Sarah had left behind. Jessica, however, refused to give in to silence. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Jessica's phone buzzed against the notebook. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen in years, Daniel Harris. Daniel had been her childhood neighbor, the boy who used to ride bikes with her down the quiet suburban streets of Eugene. Back then, he was awkward and quiet, but always curious about gadgets, taking apart old radios just to see how they worked. Now, he had turned that curiosity into a career, working with drone technology for a local surveying company. "Jessica," his voice sounded hesitant at first, almost as if saying her name after so many years carried weight. "I think I found something. And I don't know who else to call." Her stomach tightened. She pressed the phone closer to her ear. "Found what?" "You need to see it yourself," he said. "It's from footage I captured out near the Willamette National Forest yesterday afternoon." Jessica closed her notebook slowly, her heart pounding. In the background of the call, she could hear the faint hum of equipment, the clicking of a keyboard. Daniel wasn't the type to exaggerate, and she knew that. He spoke only when he had evidence in his hands. When they finally met later that night, Daniel slid his laptop across the cafe table. The screen showed shaky footage from a drone, its camera moving across the treetops. The forest stretched endlessly, dark, damp, familiar. Then, in a single frame, a figure appeared. A girl, thin, pale, dressed in torn fabric. Her face wasn't clear, but her posture, her eyes staring upward at the buzzing drone, carried a haunting familiarity. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The years melted away in an instant. For the first time in 15 years, she dared to say her sister's name out loud, a whisper, barely leaving her lips. Sarah. The following morning, Jessica woke with the image burned into her mind. That pale figure standing among the trees, eyes wide as though pleading for someone to notice her. She hadn't slept. Her thoughts raced with a mixture of hope and dread. For years she had chased false leads, followed rumors that ended in disappointment. But this was different. This was evidence. She replayed the video on her phone over and over, pausing, zooming, analyzing every blurred detail. The outline of the shoulders, the angle of the head, the way the figure turned just slightly before disappearing into the brush. It wasn't just a shadow, not a trick of light. Someone was there, someone real. Jessica met Daniel again that afternoon, this time near the edge of the Willamette National Forest, where he had flown the drone. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked cedar. Pine needles crunched underfoot as they walked down the narrow trail, Daniel carrying his equipment strapped to his back. "This isn't the first strange thing I've picked up," Daniel admitted quietly. He pulled a small folder from his bag and handed it to her. Inside were printed stills from older flights, dark smudges, outlines, sometimes what looked like crude markings on tree trunks. "I never connected them before, just thought it was hikers, maybe vandals. But now—" Jessica's fingers trembled as she flipped through the images. In one, faint but visible, was a series of scratches carved into bark. SM, the initials, Sarah Mitchell. Her breath hitched. "Why didn't you show me this earlier?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "Because I wasn't sure. And because I didn't want to give you false hope. You've had enough of that." The forest around them seemed to lean in closer as he spoke. The calls of distant crows echoed between the trees. Every sound, rustling branches, the drip of rainwater from leaves, felt like it carried meaning. Jessica pulled her jacket tighter, scanning the tree line. They stopped at a clearing where Daniel had launched the drone. The ground was damp, scattered with footprints from recent rain. But among the animal tracks, Jessica noticed something else, smaller, human-like impressions, leading toward the denser part of the woods. Bare feet. Her pulse quickened. "Daniel," she whispered, pointing. He crouched, examining the prints. "They're fresh," he said. His voice shook. "Whoever it is, they were here not long ago." The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica felt her throat tighten, a memory crashing over her. Sarah's laughter echoing across the picnic meadow, the sight of her balloon drifting skyward. For the first time in years, the memory didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of a trail. Jessica knelt beside the footprints, her hand hovering above the damp impressions without touching them. The shape was unmistakable. 5 toes, a narrow arch, the fragile outline of someone who hadn't worn shoes in years. They followed a broken line into the undergrowth, fading where the moss grew thicker. Her heart thudded in her chest. It's her. It has to be her. Daniel shifted uneasily, glancing around the trees. "We should call the authorities," he muttered. "Not yet," Jessica replied sharply, surprising even herself with the firmness in her tone. She had dealt with law enforcement before, patrol officers, detectives, even state investigators. Each time they offered sympathy but little else. Leads were dismissed as coincidences, sightings brushed aside as unreliable. For years she had begged them to believe, and for years she had been told to move on. Now she wanted proof before anyone could take this away from her again. As they pressed deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The canopy thickened, blocking out the fading afternoon light. Daniel launched his drone again, sending it buzzing high above the treetops. Jessica walked beneath it, her eyes darting to every broken branch and faint trail. It wasn't long before they found the second sign. A tree, old and twisted, stood at the edge of a shallow ravine. On its bark, someone had carved lines, tallies, dozens of them, etched crudely with a sharp object. Jessica counted silently, 40, 50, more. Years, perhaps, each line a mark of time endured. Beside the tallies, faint but legible, were the words, "Still here." Jessica pressed her palm against the carving, her chest tightening with grief and rage. It was Sarah's voice, frozen in wood. Daniel raised the drone's monitor for her to see. The camera panned across the ravine, where an old path curved into shadows. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, sudden motion. A figure darted between trees, too quick for a clear view, but undeniably human. Jessica's breath caught. She leaned closer to the screen. "Rewind that." Daniel did. Frame by frame, the figure emerged again, slender, long hair matted, clothes little more than scraps. And just before disappearing, the figure turned slightly toward the camera. Even blurred, Jessica swore she saw the shape of her sister's eyes, wide, searching, desperate. Her knees weakened. The forest tilted around her, and she gripped the tree for balance. Daniel swallowed hard. "Jess, if that really is her, she's been out here all this time." Jessica's voice broke as she whispered, 15 years. The weight of those words hung between them. 15 birthdays missed. 15 Christmas mornings with an empty chair, 15 years of silence, carved into bark and marked by footsteps in the mud. Somewhere ahead, in the labyrinth of trees, Sarah Mitchell was alive. And Jessica wasn't leaving without her. Jessica refused to leave the forest that night. She and Daniel set up a small camp near the ravine, their only light the weak glow of a lantern. Every crack of a branch made her head snap up. Every gust of wind carried the possibility of footsteps. Sleep was impossible. She replayed the drone footage again and again, pausing on the blurred image of the figure turning toward the camera. Her mind filled the gaps, the curve of Sarah's cheek, the frightened tilt of her eyes. Could survival carve such a resemblance into a stranger? Or was it really her sister, caught in a single frozen frame? By morning, exhaustion weighed on Jessica's shoulders, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She opened her notebook, adding new sketches, the carvings, the footprints, the approximate location of the sighting. Years of failed leads had taught her how to record every possible clue, no matter how small. Daniel leaned against a tree, sipping coffee from a tin mug. "Jess, what's the plan? Because if we keep this to ourselves too long, we could lose her." "I know," Jessica admitted, her pen pausing mid-scribble. "But if we go to the police now, they'll take over. They'll shut me out. I can't risk that. Not again." Daniel studied her, concern etched into his face. "You've carried this alone for too long. Maybe letting someone else in isn't a weakness." Jessica didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on the carved words. "Still here." It wasn't a plea to strangers. It was a message to her. Later that day, they followed the faint trail deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, littered with moss-covered logs and slick stones. Daniel piloted the drone ahead, its buzzing a constant presence above them. Through the monitor, they spotted odd details: a patch of cleared earth, a rusted bucket, remnants of a fire pit. Someone had been living here. Jessica knelt beside the ashes. She picked up a charred stick, sniffing the faint smell of burned pine. "This isn't old," she said. "It's been used recently." Daniel turned the camera, sweeping the area. In the corner of the screen, something shimmered. A strip of fabric caught on a branch. Jessica rushed over, pulling it free. It was weathered, torn, but unmistakably patterned with faded daisies. Her throat tightened. This was Sarah's dress, the one she wore that day. The realization hit like a wave. Not only was Sarah alive, but she had carried the same piece of clothing for 15 years. Jessica clutched the fabric to her chest. She whispered, almost to herself. She never gave up on being found. The discovery of the fabric changed everything. Jessica tucked it carefully into her bag, her hands trembling as though she were holding Sarah herself. The forest no longer felt like just a place. It had become a witness, keeping secrets sealed in moss and bark for 15 years. As they pressed forward, they found more fragments. A rusted tin cup near the roots of an oak tree. A narrow trail where branches had been deliberately trimmed, just enough for someone to pass unnoticed. And then, most haunting of all, a bundle of stones stacked in a small circle, arranged with precision. In the center, a weathered toy horse carved from wood. Jessica crouched, brushing the dirt from it. She remembered the toy. It had belonged to their grandfather, who had whittled it for Sarah before he passed. The horse had gone missing after the picnic, assumed lost in the chaos. Yet here it was, carried into the woods, protected all this time. Her breath shook. She's been leaving us a trail, little pieces of home. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. Jess, if she's alive, she's not just surviving. She's trying to reach you. But the deeper they went, the more unsettling the signs became. Near a creek, they stumbled upon footprints alongside heavier ones, adult, male, wearing boots. They overlapped Sarah's barefoot tracks, circling them, almost guiding them. Jessica froze. She wasn't alone. The realization churned her stomach. For years she had imagined Sarah wandering lost, too young to find her way back, but now a darker picture emerged. Someone had been with her, someone who had chosen to keep her hidden. That night, Jessica returned home and spread everything across her table, the photographs, the carvings, the toy horse, the torn fabric. The evidence painted a chilling story. Sarah hadn't simply disappeared into the forest. She had been taken and kept there. Her mother, Linda, arrived unannounced, finding Jessica hunched over the evidence. Linda's face, older and etched with sorrow, softened when she saw the fabric. Tears welled in her eyes as she touched it. "That's her dress," she whispered. "I sewed those daisies myself." Jessica's throat tightened. "She's alive, Mom. I know it." But Linda's tears weren't only of joy. They carried fear, too. She hesitated, then confessed. "There's something I never told you. That day at the picnic, your Uncle Gregory was there. He said he was going for a walk in the woods, but when everything happened, he swore he hadn't seen her." The room spun. Pieces clicked into place. Gregory, the uncle who had always lingered on the edges of their grief, always quiet when the family searched for answers. He had been there all along. Jessica clenched her fists. "Then he's the one who knows where she is." Jessica couldn't shake her mother's words. All night, the name Gregory echoed through her mind. Uncle Gregory had always been a quiet presence, helpful at family gatherings, the one who mowed Linda's lawn when Robert was working long hours, the one who never missed a holiday meal. After Sarah's disappearance, he was around even more, always offering to help with anything. Jessica had never suspected him. No one had. But now, with the evidence spread across her table, the picture sharpened into something darker. The barefoot tracks paired with boot prints, the deliberate carvings on trees, the wooden horse, these weren't random signs of survival. They were part of a hidden life, one that someone else had controlled. Jessica went to see him the next morning. His house sat on the outskirts of town, tucked behind overgrown hedges. The driveway was cluttered with tools, old tarps, and the rusted frame of a pickup. Gregory himself answered the door, his expression flat, his eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of her. "Jessica," he said slowly, "been a while." She forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing inside her. Yeah, too long. He invited her in. The house smelled of stale tobacco and dust. On the walls hung faded photographs of fishing trips and birthdays, family moments that now felt contaminated. Jessica's gaze lingered on one photo. Sarah, 5 years old, perched on Gregory's shoulders, laughing. She swallowed hard. Do you ever think about her? About Sarah? Gregory's jaw tightened. He reached for his coffee mug, taking his time before answering. Every day, don't we all? But something in his voice felt rehearsed, like a line repeated too often. Jessica's instincts screamed at her. She noticed the boots by the door, worn, caked with dried mud, the tread matching the pattern she had seen in the forest. Her pulse hammered. It's him. That night, Jessica told Daniel everything. They sat in her apartment, the rain pattering against the window, the evidence laid out between them. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. If Gregory's involved, Jess, this isn't just about finding Sarah. This is about exposing him. We need proof, something undeniable. Jessica nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. Then we go back into the forest. If he's been keeping her there, there has to be more. A cabin, supplies, something. The next morning they set out before dawn. The forest greeted them with a heavy mist, the air damp and cold. The drone buzzed overhead, scanning the canopy. Hours passed as they followed faint trails, weaving deeper into the woods than they had ever gone. And then they saw it. Through the branches, half hidden by ivy and moss, stood a small wooden cabin. Its roof sagged, its windows boarded, but smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney. Jessica froze. Her breath caught. Daniel whispered, "Oh my God." The drone hovered closer, capturing footage. Through a gap in the boards, a shadow moved, then another, and then a face. A girl's face, pale and hollow-cheeked, framed by tangled hair. Her eyes locked on the drone, wide and unblinking. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered the name she had carried for 15 years. Sarah? Jessica's knees nearly buckled at the sight. For 15 years she had pictured Sarah in her mind, frozen as an 8-year-old child with a red balloon in her hand. But here she was, alive, older now, though frail and ghost-like. Her lips moved silently as she pressed her hand against the window pane. Daniel steadied Jessica's shoulder. It's her, Jess, it's really her. They crouched low behind the undergrowth, afraid to get too close. The cabin was clearly lived in. Chopped firewood stacked neatly at the side. A line of clothing hung on a rope, pots and pans arranged outside, as though this place had been functioning for years. Whoever had built it had done so with intention and secrecy. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Jessica's breath stopped. A figure stepped out onto the porch. It was Gregory. He looked older, his hair streaked with gray, his movements slower, but his posture carried the same guarded confidence she remembered. He scanned the forest, suspicion etched in his eyes, before stepping back inside. Jessica's hands curled into fists. Rage and disbelief surged through her veins. He had her all this time. They pulled back, their breaths shallow. Daniel whispered urgently, "We can't confront him now. It's too dangerous. We need a plan." But Jessica's heart screamed otherwise. Every instinct told her to run into that cabin, to wrap her arms around Sarah and drag her out. Yet she knew Daniel was right. If Gregory had managed to keep Sarah hidden for this long, he wouldn't let go easily. That night, Jessica pored over the drone footage. The camera had caught Sarah's face with enough clarity that there could be no doubt. She was alive. She was right there. But Jessica also noticed something else. Scratches on the inside of the window frame, like markings carved over time. She zoomed in, her pulse quickening. Letters, faint but readable. J.M. Her initials. Sarah had remembered her. Tears blurred Jessica's vision. For years she had feared Sarah would forget, that time would erase the bond between them. But here was proof, carved into wood. Sarah had been holding on to her sister's name all along. Jessica pressed her forehead against the table, sobbing silently. Hope was no longer a fragile dream. It was real, tangible, alive in the woods. The next day she returned with Daniel, this time armed with a plan. They documented everything: photographs, video, the carved initials. They gathered every piece of evidence to bring to the authorities, but Jessica's fear gnawed at her. What if Gregory moved her before they could act? What if the chance slipped away again? They debated late into the night. Daniel urged patience, but Jessica couldn't shake the thought of Sarah's hollow eyes staring from behind those boards. "I won't let her spend one more day in that place," she whispered. The decision was made. They would go back, one final time, not just to film, not just to observe, but to bring Sarah home. The night before they made their move, Jessica lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of her apartment felt like the cabin door opening in her mind. She could still see Sarah's gaunt face pressed against the glass, those eyes that mirrored her own. 15 years had been stolen, but Sarah had survived. And now Jessica knew it was her turn to be the one who wouldn't let go. At dawn, she and Daniel drove out toward the forest. Neither spoke much during the ride. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of what they were about to do. Daniel kept glancing at her, concern etched across his face, but Jessica's focus was unbreakable. They parked the car miles away and walked the rest of the trail, moving carefully, quietly. Jessica's heartbeat seemed louder than their footsteps. Every shadow in the trees looked like Gregory watching. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. When they reached the ravine, the cabin came into view again, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Jessica's breath caught. It looked almost ordinary, like a place someone might retire to for peace. But she knew better. That house was a prison. Daniel placed a hand on her arm. "We get her out safely. That's all that matters. Don't let anger take over." Jessica nodded, though her blood boiled. She could barely contain the storm inside. They waited until the sun dipped lower, until shadows stretched across the clearing. Gregory emerged briefly to split wood, his figure silhouetted against the dim light. He looked older but strong. He worked methodically, unaware of the eyes fixed on him from the tree line. When he stepped back inside, Jessica and Daniel crept closer. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might give them away. They circled around the side of the cabin, crouching beneath the boarded window where she had seen Sarah before. Jessica whispered, "Sarah." For a moment, nothing. Then movement. A pale face appeared again in the crack between the boards. Sarah's eyes widened, her lips parted, trembling. Jessica pressed her fingers to the gap. "It's me, Jess. I'm here." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She mirrored the gesture, pressing her hand against the same spot. For the first time in 15 years the sisters touched, separated by wood, but bound by blood. Jessica's voice broke. "I'm getting you out, I promise." Sarah shook her head frantically, whispering something Jessica couldn't hear. Her lips moved again, slower this time. "He's here." Jessica froze. A floorboard creaked inside. Heavy footsteps approached. She pulled back just as the cabin door swung open. Gregory stepped out, his eyes sweeping the tree line. Jessica and Daniel pressed into the shadows, hearts pounding. For a long moment, he simply stood there, scanning the forest with suspicion carved deep into his weathered face. Then, without a word, he stepped off the porch and walked toward the woodpile. Daniel's hand tightened around Jessica's wrist. "We can't wait. He'll never let her go." Jessica nodded. Rage and love tangled inside her chest. She had promised Sarah, and promises had power. She moved quickly to the back of the cabin where the boards were weaker. With Daniel's help, they pried one loose, the wood groaning under their force. Inside, Sarah gasped. She stumbled back, eyes wide, then forward again, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. Jessica reached through, gripping her sister's arm for the first time in 15 years. "Come on," she whispered fiercely. "We're leaving." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she crawled through the narrow opening. Her body was frail, but the moment Jessica pulled her into her arms, she felt the warmth of life, fragile yet unbroken. She held her tightly, burying her face in her sister's hair, inhaling the scent of smoke and pine and years stolen. Sarah whispered against her shoulder, voice hoarse, "I knew you'd come." Jessica broke, sobs racking her chest. I never stopped looking, not once. The reunion lasted only seconds before the sound of splitting wood stopped. Gregory had noticed. The silence outside the cabin was louder than any shout. Then came the heavy thud of boots. Moving toward the door, Daniel urged them on. "Go, now!" They stumbled into the forest, Jessica clutching Sarah's hand, Daniel close behind. Branches tore at their clothes, roots threatened to trip them, but adrenaline carried them forward. Behind them, Gregory's voice bellowed through the trees, furious and commanding, "Sarah, get back here!" But Sarah didn't stop. She clung tighter to Jessica's hand, her breaths ragged but determined. For the first time in years, she was running not away from freedom, but toward it. When they reached the clearing, headlights cut through the dusk. Police cars Daniel had called earlier, waiting in secret as backup. Officers rushed forward, their flashlights slicing the darkness. Jessica pulled Sarah into their arms, her body shaking violently but safe. Finally safe. Gregory emerged moments later, shouting, but the sight of officers with drawn weapons stopped him cold. His face twisted, torn between fury and resignation. He didn't resist as they forced him to the ground, handcuffs snapping around his wrists. Jessica held Sarah close, rocking her gently. "It's over," she whispered. Again and again, though part of her knew it was only the beginning of healing. Sarah lifted her face, tears carving lines down her cheeks. Her voice trembled, raw and broken. I kept count. Every year, I thought maybe you forgot me." Jessica brushed the hair from her sister's face, her own tears falling freely. "Never. Not for a single day." For the first time in 15 years, Sarah smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. And in that moment, beneath the weight of the night and the flashing red and blue lights, Jessica felt something she hadn't known in years: hope. The days that followed felt surreal. News of Sarah Mitchell's return spread quickly across Eugene, and soon across the country. Headlines flashed on TV screens: "Missing girl found alive after 15 years in Oregon forest." Reporters camped outside the hospital where Sarah was undergoing evaluations. Strangers lit candles and vigils, whispering prayers for her healing. But for Jessica, the outside noise faded into the background. All that mattered was sitting at her sister's bedside, holding her hand, reminding her with every word, every touch, "You're not alone anymore." Sarah's recovery was fragile. Her voice, hoarse from years of silence, came in broken phrases. She startled easily at loud sounds, flinched when doors opened too quickly. Yet there was strength in her, too, a quiet resilience carved by survival. Doctors marveled that she had endured so long in isolation. Jessica stayed day and night, recounting stories Sarah had missed. Birthdays, graduations, their mother's laugh on Christmas mornings. Sarah listened, eyes wide, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Sometimes she smiled faintly, sometimes she simply pressed her forehead against Jessica's arm, as though afraid she might vanish again. Robert and Linda visited, too, though the weight of their guilt hung heavy. Linda wept openly, apologizing over and over, her hands trembling as she stroked Sarah's hair. Robert remained quieter, his emotions harder to read. But Jessica saw the way his eyes lingered on his youngest daughter, as though begging forgiveness he couldn't put into words. And then there was Gregory. His arrest shook the entire family. For years, he had been a part of their lives, sitting at their table, helping with chores, comforting them in their grief. The betrayal cut deep, and the questions cut deeper. Why had he done it? What had he wanted? Some said control, others a twisted sense of protection. But in truth, no explanation could mend what he had broken. One evening, Jessica sat alone by the hospital window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She thought of the little girl with the red balloon, chasing laughter into the trees. And she thought of the young woman now asleep in the bed beside her, older, scarred, but alive. 15 years, she whispered to herself, 15 years stolen, but not lost, because Sarah was here. And that meant there was still time to build something new. Weeks later, when Sarah was finally released from the hospital, Jessica walked beside her through the front doors into the sunlight. The warmth on Sarah's face made her pause, eyes closing as though she were relearning what it felt like. Jessica squeezed her hand, steadying her. The community welcomed Sarah with open arms. Neighbors left flowers on the porch. Children drew pictures that said, "Welcome home." Yet Jessica knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing wasn't measured in headlines or applause. Healing meant sleepless nights, therapy sessions, and learning how to live in a world that had moved on without her. But Jessica also knew one thing. Sarah would never face it alone again. One evening, the sisters sat together in their mother's backyard, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine. Jessica pulled something from her pocket, the small velvet box she had kept for years. Inside was the silver star necklace, polished and gleaming softly in the twilight. She placed it gently around Sarah's neck. "I've held on to this since the day you disappeared," Jessica whispered. "It was my reminder that you were still out there, and now it's yours again." Sarah touched the charm, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time she smiled, without hesitation. "I carved your name so I wouldn't forget," she said softly. "I thought maybe you forgot me." Jessica's voice broke as she pulled her sister into an embrace. Never, not for a single moment. Silence settled around them, but it wasn't the silence of fear or loss. It was peace, the kind that comes when truth is no longer hidden, when love has endured the darkest of places. Years had been stolen, but love had not. And as Jessica held her sister close, she realized that the story, which began with a vanished girl and a red balloon, wasn't only about disappearance. It was about return, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between two sisters who refused to let go of each other, no matter how many years passed.